Welcome to episode 7 of the Strategic Momentum Podcast. I'm your host, Connie Steele. In every episode, we share tips, stories, and advice from progressive leaders and how they've been able to break through their business inertia and propel their business forward. In marketing, you often hear that it's all about the customer. For Jim Gregoire, the Chief Product Officer at Openbay, this is something that is second nature. As a seasoned technology and marketing leader, Jim offers his unique perspective and advice on what an effective product strategy entails: customer empathy. Thanks for coming on the show today, Jim.
Good to be here, Connie.
So you've had a passion for building products, specifically online experience, for much of your career. And unlike other product leaders, you're interesting in that you started in marketing and then shifted to running product organizations. So tell us a little bit more about your career journey and what led you to where you are today.
Yeah, I started in marketing. As you said, I kind of stumbled on an agency job where I did customer acquisition and really enjoyed that. But there was this one consumer-based client that I really enjoyed working with, and I loved the type of work that we did, and it was very exciting. And you know, it was the mid-'90s, and it was called AOL, or America Online at the time. And I increasingly spent time with them as a client, helping them figure out this customer acquisition model, because it really became the machine of that business. And so much so that over a couple of years, they recruited me into the company. I kind of took to it because I felt like it was a good mix of art and science. We have a lot of great metrics that we track: conversion rates, and visits, and things like that. And that existed offline, which is when I started my career. We were trying to get people online. And we used a lot of those metrics, and that was the science part. And the art part, of course, had to do with messaging and offer and all those things.
And then how did that experience in marketing, your art and science part of it, get you exposed to building online experiences and then shifting into the product piece?
Yeah, it really was very, very natural, because as anybody who's worked in either of those disciplines knows, they tend to be stakeholders of one another. If you're the one acquiring, you want to understand what the value proposition is. You want to understand what it is that's trying to be accomplished there, what pain you're trying to solve, what problem you're trying to solve, for what kind of customer, so that you can find them and make sure you get the right ones. And so when you're at that intersection, where you're at this sort of confluence, it becomes very easy to try to understand the other side. And that's what happened. And in fact, I was in a fairly specific situation where I had spent a lot of years doing customer acquisition, refining the craft, if you will, and really enjoying it, but kind of looking for an opportunity to grow. And the obvious place to grow would have been product from that point, because I was kind of looking at and then thinking about, why would somebody use this product? And what is the circumstance under which they're trying to make a decision? How do they become aware that they have a problem that they need to solve? And then when they do that, where do they look for solutions, and how do they assess whether or not a solution is good for them? That's all part of the marketing and customer acquisition thing. And so I had the opportunity to spend time with a lot of product folks on some special projects at the time. And I did that. And over a period of a couple of years, I really learned a lot about what happened in product, and it became very, very interesting to me. And that was kind of the beginning of my transition.
And why don't you tell us a little bit, too, about the different product roles that you've had along the way and where you are now?
It really started in research, where I was able to work with some really talented and skilled people. And I learned a lot about how to execute on research, how to design it so that you have the outcome that you want, how not to bias your audience. I learned a lot about how to do it so you would get the insights that you were looking for, learning how to apply it to strategy, first marketing and then product. And it was a lot of fun. It was a great lens through which to look at product and trying to solve problems in a product management sort of way, because it's market-based and it's needs-based. And I'm a big believer in that, especially as somebody who's a former marketer. It really made a lot of sense to me. It was a fairly sensible and great transition for me into the product world. I moved on after 10 years at AOL. I worked at Monster in a product role where I owned responsibility for the consumer team. And after spending a couple of years there, I started what now is a 10-year journey through Startup Land, where I've worked for companies that are small and early stage like Openbay, and others like Yodel that was just acquired last year by Web.com. So big startups and little startups, because there are such things. But the role doesn't really change. It doesn't really change. You are still responsible for ensuring that you identify a slice of a market that has a problem that you think you are uniquely positioned to solve. And that at the end of the day, that is really your job, is to see the world through that lens. Because if you can do that, you can do your job effectively. And that's what it is. Every single company, whether it's a big one, a small one, a VC-funded company, a public company, it doesn't really matter. Your role is still that.
So you have mentioned quite a bit about taking away the pain, identifying those needs that they have, and then fundamentally providing the right solutions that address them. Let's use that as that pivot point to talk about product strategy and what you have done to help craft the right product strategy, whether it be for Openbay or for any of your other roles. Why do you feel that companies still seem to struggle with creating this right product strategy? I mean, we know that it's foundational to ultimately developing that right experience for your end customer.
I guess it depends on the context, and there's a lot of different reasons. And I feel like at this point in my career, I've seen a lot of them. I've seen most of them, as my guess. In a larger organization, the strategy matters a lot, because your job as somebody who's writing the strategy and trying to get buy-in has to do just that. You have to bring resources together, because you're responsible for doing that. And it's generally true of anybody who's in a product role, is that you generally have to be in this position where you have to bring resources to bear. And so in a larger organization, you need the strategy as a communications device to convince parties to give you resources. It's certainly true on a smaller scale as well. But less so, because in Openbay is a small company with fewer than 20 folks. Here, the reason that it's important, it's still a communications device, but has a slightly different application. We have mostly technical resources in the company that weren't trained the same way product people are trained, and don't think the same way product people think. And so what you're trying to do there with the strategy is you're not necessarily trying to gather resources, although that is somewhat true. What you're trying to do is you're trying to say, hey, you can trust me. I know how to do my job. And here's what I think we should do, and here's why we should do it, to an audience that largely does not think that way on a daily basis. They think about building things, and they get excited about code and architecture and design and all of those things. And so it has a slightly different application in a smaller environment than it does a bigger environment, but still a very, very critical device for you to be successful as a product person.
What do you think the myths are in terms of being able to create an effective strategy that serves not only as a communications device, but that vision, that mission, that unifying piece that helps the management team understand the direction that the company needs to go towards?
Folks think that they already know what needs to be done because of their own biases. I think the short answer to your question is we're human. And what happens when you're human is you have these inherent biases. You have biases that you use, whether you know it or not, every day, all day. You invoke biases that are part of your thought process that bring you to certain judgments, and in some cases, judgments lead to decisions. And when that happens, because that's how the brain processes information quickly, you make all kinds of assumptions about where you are as an organization and what needs to be done. And that may vary to a person. And it certainly does vary by functional area, because people in functional areas are trained the same way, at least in theory. And so what happens is oftentimes strategy gets glossed over. Then your problem when you don't have a strategy, but everyone has their own version of it. And so then you spend often a lot of time, which is very, very inefficient, trying to render the vision that you have in your own head with the one that's in the head of the person or the group that you're talking to. A very inefficient way to go about sort of setting a direction and following a direction for a company. And clearly, product strategy, any strategy document will solve that problem, or at least propose to solve that problem. And so it's very easy to get lulled into the sense of like, well, we kind of know what we're doing. It's fairly obvious. That's why we're all here.
How do you then break this bias, this inward-looking view versus an outside-in? How do you help people understand that this isn't really reflective of the needs of your target audience? How are you able to create that strategic momentum to break through this notion of we already know what the strategy may be?
First of all, you need to understand, well, strategically, what audience should we go after? And we can talk about that more in a moment. But if you can't empathize once you've decided the target that you want to serve, that you feel is underserved in some way, if you can't empathize with them, then you are going to struggle to do your job as a product person. And so it's your job to ensure that you're doing the work, whether it's primary research directly with you doing it hands-on or through a partner. It's interpreting secondary research. It's making observations on behavior from a dashboard of people that capture behavior of people using your product. There's all kinds of ways where you can collect market information on needs, desires, behaviors, goals of your audience. However you choose to do it, you should be able to empathize with them. Because if you can't do that, you're not going to be able to channel their needs into some strategy and then to convince others that what we have to do is the right thing to do. That's your job, first and foremost. And I use a phrase, and it's not uncommonly used, it's called dog fooding, which is ideally, if you're a product person and you're in a job, you can dog food, which means you can build a product for yourself. So it becomes much easier for you to empathize if you are part of the target audience than if you, in fact, you have never done the thing that you're trying to solve for. So that to me, that's what it's about, is really kind of getting at the epicenter of, what the pain is and making sure that you understand it fully yourself.
Once you have that information, what are the other factors you need to consider? What other data points do you feel need to be taken into account to fully flesh out your product strategy and convince everyone in your organization this is the right direction to go in?
You need to be able to ensure that the product is crafted in a way to engage users, because your job, and this has always been a big part of my philosophy about what a product person stands for and what they're responsible for and what they're accountable for to the rest of the organization, is to build habits. If you're building habitual behavior around the product or the products that you build for your audience, then you're driving value because it's implied in there. If people keep using your product because you've built habit around it, they're doing so without much thought. That's what habit is. It's doing something without a lot of forethought. And that's a good sign. That means you've built something valuable. They are, as your customers, by virtue of using your product habitually, assigning value to it and saying, yes, this helps me. If I'm paying for it, or if I'm looking at ads, or whatever the model is, whatever it is, the experience is good and I get value out of it, and then I keep doing it. And so at the very core of what you do, your job is to ensure that you have a hypothesis on what that is. And then when you've delivered the product, you have a dashboard and other feedback mechanisms which are more qualitative, like talking to customers or reading verbatim feedback through some channel to affirm that what you've done and what you're doing is right.
And so if I think about this notion of building habits, the nuances of going from the data on a need to identifying what those habits, which then turns into features, are, how would somebody do that?
Been able to step into the shoes of your prospective customer and see the world through their eye. the creativity that you bring to the table and the other experiences, you have to have an appreciation for experiences and quality experiences and experiences that help somebody solve a problem. And if you have a broad landscape of that kind of experience yourself because you're curious about those things, bringing that experience to bear to solve your own local problem for your company is a lot easier. Because what I'm saying is you just draw from that incredible, vast database of references that you've created for yourself. The best product people I know have a lot of experiences and sort of seek out other products just to experience things because they're curious and because they know that there will be great reference points. Because what we're doing a lot of times is just reinventing something else that already exists someplace else. I'm a firm believer in that. I like to think of myself as having creativity, but we really do often repurpose experiences for our own uses.
And so let's take that notion of, repurposing your own experiences and leveraging that for, the work that you do. How do you take that? And then as you think about executing against this vision, this strategy that you have, how do you ensure that you stay true to the audience that you're empathizing when you launch it?
You talk to them all the time. You have to channel them, and when you're channeling them, you're forming hypotheses on what is going to help them, and then you find a way to cheaply build it and put it in front of them. And that could be demoware or vaporware, which is really not actual code, so to speak, working code. It's just a picture, a static picture, any prototype of any kind to get feedback, to say, hey, I think I understand the world that you live in. And in fact, I've lived in it quite a bit myself. And it's important to me that I understand how you see the world. Here's what I think we can do to solve your problem. And I frankly do that on a weekly basis. Where I have a roster of what we call hero customers of ours. And some of them actually aren't even customers, they're just prospects. And I have a phone call with them. And we just talk about their day and talk about the problems that they have. I visit with them in person. I observe their environment. And once you're able to do that, and then you're able to prototype something, or actually build it if you choose, and then you put it in front of them, that's a critical feedback channel that you can never take your eye off of. If you do, your assumptions can get stale because the market does change regularly. And guess what? There are competitors out there who may move much more quickly than you do, or who will do more research, or who will get more feedback. And so that's the great thing about competitive markets, is that if you're paying attention and you want to win, it keeps you on your toes. You have to be in touch with that audience.
And we see this a lot today where, the shift towards agile development is all about testing and learning and constantly being in touch with customers. And you have to get their feedback to figure out what really resonates with them and what doesn't. How have you been able to train product managers who may have not traditionally thought in this way? They were maybe more technical, and everything you talked about is having a connection with the customer.
I think they have to have an interest to begin with, and they have to ask for it. So you have to figure out how to get them to ask for it. Because if they're not going to ask for coaching, then you can give it all day long and it's not really going to matter. That's really a big part of it. And to me, the other big part is it has to be ongoing. You do have to act like a mentor all the time. It's not something you do once a week or once a day. It is pervasive through your communications with your team, whether it's in a one-on-one with somebody, whether it's in a group setting, it's in a planning session. You have to be modeling the behavior that you want them to exhibit, and you have to take time to explain why it is that you do what you do, or why you're asking them to do what you want them to do. And again, that's really all part of the commitment of developing somebody who wants to learn.
I love this emphasis of somebody who always wants to learn, because I think there have been perceptions and experiences in which the product team is seen as really more the technical side of the business and not one that is reflecting the audience.
It's important to keep in mind that I think you have to have a lot of different experiences and skills to be an effective product person, because you do tend to find yourself at the center of a lot of functional areas when you're in that role. And I know the shift in the last 10 years is that product people are more technical, and I can appreciate that that's important. But the reality is that day to day, when you're functioning in a product role, you really have to know and ideally have experienced firsthand a lot of, as many of the functional areas that are stakeholders that touch product that are nearby you as possible. Because if you don't, it's going to be very, very difficult. A mentor of mine once said about this situation, hey, when you're working in a product role, you kind of have to know a lot about marketing. You kind of have to know a lot about sales. You kind of have to know enough about engineering. You kind of have to know enough about project management, finance, so forth and so on. And the reason is because you, as the product person or the head of, the owner of a product or the head of a product team, have to come right up to the edge of all those functional areas and deliver something to them that is highly relevant to them. It's not unlike building a product for the end user in the market who's outside of your company. You have to have a great deal of empathy and understanding of the environment that your internal partners live in as well. And so when I think about really well-grounded product people, they have a lot of exposure to sales and marketing and understand how it works. They understand at least the basics of finance. They understand the stack that you're working with if you happen to develop a product in a digital environment. And if not, and if it's something that's physically manufactured, then you sure as heck should understand where the supply of your materials comes from and how it's assembled into your product. It's essential that you know those things, which is why it's such a demanding role to be in, because you really have to cover a lot of ground and a lot of surface area to be effective.
And how do you feel your marketing experience has helped prepare you to being the product leader you are today?
It's just another arrow in the quiver to be able to say that you have great empathy for your, in this case, internal customers. If you are working with a marketing team and a sales team to sell and market a product and build brand and awareness around a product, you're going to have a great deal of empathy for the types of things that they need to get done when the product is actually ready. And that translates into how you work with them every single day. And you will have a much better time being a more effective leader and valued partner if you have had that experience yourself. If you're thinking like a partner, in this case, a marketing or salesperson, you will have already thought about the objections. And if there are implications on the product and how it's designed, what the UX, the user experience of it is, what features are in there, even better, because you will have handed them something that they can just run with, rather than handing them something that is not shovel-ready, so to speak, which makes their job a little bit harder. So it makes you a much better and more effective partner.
To me, I would almost summarize it as you've connected the dots as to what your other stakeholders would need to consider in light of the circumstance that you're in. So you really assisted them because you have context of what they need to do. So you've been more than able to prepare them and subsequently serve as that true partner.
When we're in a functional area in a company, and we all are, at any given time, you're either in a service role where you're servicing a partner, or you're in a business and you're making decisions about what's a priority and what to do. And it changes hour to hour throughout everyone's day. And when you are handing off a feature or a product to internal partners, you are in a service role. If you're going to be in a service role, then you sure as heck should understand your customer and what their needs are. And that's what sales thinks about every single day, right? They need to understand their needs of their customers.
And so these problems that you're ultimately trying to solve then gets translated into...
Or a working relationship.
Right.
I mean, really, that's what it is. There are many, many times, and I've been certainly guilty of this myself, and you have to check yourself, where somebody comes with a solution, says, I need this. But oftentimes I try to pause and say, well, what problem are you trying to solve? And they'll say this. And it's like, well, there are 3 other ways we can solve that more cheaply. Will those work? That tends to be a dialogue that's effective, but folks, because of their own biases, tend to think they already have the solution. And they may be right. They may be right. But if you don't know what the problem is as a partner, isn't, a partner in another functional area of the company who's trying to help this person. If you don't know the problem that's being solved, your ability to help them is very limited.
Right. And finally, what's the best way listeners can connect with you?
Best way is probably Twitter. My handle is Jim Gregoire, JimGregoire. And of course, you can always find me on LinkedIn and hit me up there anytime.
Thank you so much for joining us today, Jim. Great insights on what it takes to be an effective product leader in this day and age.
Thanks, Connie.
The key to developing a good product strategy is the same as a good marketing strategy. Know your customer inside and out. Continuously try to understand the world they live in and what motivates them to act. And don't base it on your organization's internal point of view. Focus on how your product can develop habits and ultimately value, because your job is to take away your customers' pain. Thanks for listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast. You can connect with Jim by finding him on LinkedIn, and you can learn more about Openbay at openbay.com. If you want to hear previous episodes or even get show notes from this episode, visit us on our podcast page at flywheelassociates.com/podcast. I'm Connie Steele, and you've been listening to the Strategic Momentum Podcast.